Hello everybody, my name's Caroline, as was just announced. I was asked to take over this panel, I think about 4 or 5 days ago, because Cheryl Akle, who is the founder of Better Reading, a group that many of you will be members of, unfortunately took quite seriously ill and had to be taken to hospital. There were about 30 people who were willing to jump in for Cheryl. She's that kind of person. There were many, many people willing to help, and I feel quite honoured. So welcome everyone to Words on the Waves. Thank you to the organisers, a fantastic band of very committed volunteers who have put this on for 3 straight years now. Absolutely magnificent. And welcome to our 3 writers, Pip Williams, who has written a book a long time ago now called One Italian Summer, which inspired her to become the best-selling novelist that she is today. You hold that one for me. And we have Rachael Mogan McIntosh, who's written, pardon my French, about her family's decision to move to France. This one's for you. Thank you. And Todd Alexander, over the hill and up the wall, who described himself to me as a comedy memoirist, because this is a very, very funny book about his decision to buy a vineyard. The topic of our talk today is making a big change in your life, doing something that maybe you've always dreamed of doing. We'll start with you, Pip. What did you dream of doing?
So my partner and I used to live in Sydney, in Manly, not a view too dissimilar to this one actually, and we always dreamed of the good life, essentially, just like that show that used to be on the ABC with Felicity Kendall. That was us. And so we left Sydney, we bought 5 acres in the Adelaide Hills, and we planted an orchard, and we got chickens, and we got a couple of alpacas, and very soon the chickens were dead, and the fruit trees were fruiting, and the fruit was rotting underneath the trees, and the alpacas were being shorn, and wool was just piling up in the garage and attracting rats. And we realised that the good life that we were attempting to live was not as good as it possibly could be, and so we took the kids out of school and packed in our jobs and went to Italy for 6 months to work as willing workers on organic farms in order to learn how to do it better.
How many children, Pip?
We had 2 boys. They were 9 and 12 at the time.
And you all lived on the same, was it a farm?
No, the children lived in different states. Yeah, we all lived together. Was that wishful thinking? I don't know. Did I say that out loud?
You left them in Adelaide.
Shannon, we said, we'll take the kids out of school, we'll put them in a cupboard, and we'll fly to Italy. That was the other dream I was having.
I was trying to get across the idea that you all lived on a rural property, not that you abandoned your children. You stop now. What was your dream?
Well, I guess a similar dream that sort of went wrong in quite a lot of ways, as Pip's describing. So Keith and I had 3 kids. We still have them. We didn't leave them in France.
The theme of this talk today is how to get rid of your children.
It's going to some unexpected places. So my husband Keith had lived in France, in Paris, for a year when he was 9, and so we always had this kind of flickering, imaginative idea that one day we could do the same thing. And there came this year where all 3 of the kids were in primary school. My littlest had just started kindy, and that was the year that we decided was going to be perfect, because we could have all 3 of them in the same school. And so we went to a little town in the south of France, a very sort of, romantic and beautiful fairy tale cobblestoned little town that was in fact, really economically depressed and quite violent and,
romantic.
It actually was. I think in the book there's some part where I'm describing it as like this really bad boyfriend that you can't help but just, love.
Look at all the women going, oh yeah, no.
It's the Heathfield of the Skates.
Yes.
So like the Nick Cave of France kind of thing.
I beg your pardon?
The Nick Cave.
It was the Nick Cave of France, exactly. Sexy, and ultimately
very bad
doomed.
For you.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we spent the year there, and it was nothing like we had sort of planned or theorised. It was absolutely wonderful, but it was very difficult as well. And it's all kind of, it's all just captured in the book, the ups and the downs.
And Todd, what was your dream?
Full disclosure, my children do live in a different state. I outsourced the raising of them to some lesbians in Brisbane, and I get to spend school holidays with them, so I think I'm the cleverest one on the panel. I had a pretty successful corporate career in Sydney, but I felt I was on a corporate treadmill going absolutely nowhere, and the company was taking an ever-increasing chunk of my soul. So I went to the Barossa one day with my partner Jeff and best friends of ours, and we went to Maggie Beer's property, and I blamed my entire tree change on Maggie Beer because I was sitting at her dam and I looked at my friends and I said, that's it, I'm going to become Maggie Beer. So we looked all over the country for a property that even vaguely resembled hers and found one in the Hunter Valley. It was 100 acres, and after we signed the contract for the sale of the property, the purchase, Jeff turned to me and said, well, how big is 100 acres anyway? And so what we did is we used to live in Annandale, for those of you who know the Inner West, on a 200 square metre block with a 3 by 3 metre courtyard. But my partner's very practical, so he printed up on Google Maps the 100 acres of our property, and he laid it out over Annandale. So after dinner, we walked from Camperdown to Leichhardt to Blackwattle Bay. And I said, you're a moron, as if we've bought a property this big, and it turns out that 100 acres is as big as the Vatican. But we were very well prepared. We had a pair of rusty garden shears and a Holden Barina, which was very helpful for the country. And my dad said, well, you'll need to mow this property. So he very kindly lent us his Aldi electric lawnmower. So Jeff would put 3 extension cords end to end and mow around the house. But again, we were very prepared. It only had 12,500 grapevines and 1,000 olive trees on it. And then the last little bit of that is I said to Jeff, well, how do you know we've got 1,000 olive trees? He said, because I went to Google Earth and I counted every single dot. And that's how we started our very fun tree change.
That's amazing.
Uh-huh.
Now, when we were having a little chat before this session started, I thought to myself, probably only 2 of you had to learn another language, but
I quickly corrected Caroline and said, well, we're moving to Cessnock, so we have to learn a new language as well. It wasn't uncommon for Jeff and I to walk into the local pub and they'd usher us into the ladies' lounge and serve us a shandy. And we kind of had to quickly show people that we were willing to be blokes and work the land. So we can still walk down Cessnock these days, the main street, without being bashed, which is quite nice.
And is wineries, is that a whole different language as well? Like, are there words that you just didn't know?
Oh, I love drinking wine. In fact, when the grape consultant came to talk to us about the vineyard, she said, so do you have much experience in wine? And I said, I most certainly do. I've drank an absolute shitload over the years. And she doesn't find that very funny because she's, a farmer. And then she said, well, have you ever grown anything? And I thought about those 3 dead pot plants in our Annandale courtyard. I said, no, but my dad used to supply plastic pots to nurseries. And then she said, you're going to need a tractor for this. And we're like, really? You need a tractor to maintain 15 acres of grapes? But over the years, we learnt how to do it. Backbreaking. There's a famous quote. I don't think it's even that famous, but anyone who's ever had anything to do with a vineyard, how do you make $1 million out of a vineyard? You sink 5 million into it in the beginning. And that's pretty much what we did. But gee, it was delicious wine.
Like Elon Musk has made a small business by buying a big one. Language.
Yes. I look back, so it was 5 years ago that we came home from our year in Sommières, the little town in France. And I look back now with astonishment that I used to be able to wander the streets and speak French all day, every day.
Did you speak before you got there?
I thought I did. I had this kind of delusion that because, I'd done, a bit of high school French and I had a bit of vocabulary, and it's like how, you think you'd be able to play the drums because you can air drum and it sort of just feels intuitive. I think I sort of thought that that it would work a bit like that. So, no, I quickly was disabused of that.
And anyone in the family? What
so
about the
Keith's
children?
French is really good. By the end of our year, my two daughters, their French was beautiful. In fact, the 6-year-old, the other school mums used to say you couldn't tell which child was the foreigner in her little gang of kids because her accent was so particularly, even of this little town in the south, it was just so nice. My son Ted, who sort of refused to learn to speak any French and used to learn ancient Greek on YouTube as a sort of protest vote. But I used to, I got to this point where I used to call it politician French that I would speak, which was I could hold forth for quite a long time.
Right.
I had enough subject and enough vocabulary to do that, but every time anybody spoke to me, I had no idea what they said. So I would sort of be like, well, thank you for your comment, and now I'll respond with something completely unrelated to what you've just said to me and behave as though that's how a conversation works. So it was difficult.
Language, Pip?
Well, I'll tell you a story about language. So one of the farms that we stayed on was in Bologna, and they produced food for market. And so I would go to the market with the farmer and help sell the food. And it was a particularly hot day, and I was having a bit of a break, and I was wandering around this market, and I thought, I'll buy a couple of peaches for myself and Elisa, who I was with. And so I lined up, and I was practicing in the line. My Italian wasn't fantastic, but I had quite a good accent, actually, like your 6-year-old. And I finally got to the front, and I might get this wrong again, but I said, "Due pesce, per favore." And the guy looked at me quizzically, and I said, "Due pesce, per favore." And I just said it louder and louder. And there's quite a queue behind me. Everyone's waiting for their bloody peaches and nectarines. And I said it one more time, and the woman tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're asking for 2 fish." and everyone laughed. Everyone was laughing. In fact, they were laughing quite hysterically. And the guy behind the thing was laughing, and he gave me 3 peaches because he felt so sorry for me, and I had such a good accent. And I that's in the book. I read that section at the launch on an event 6 years ago, and these 2 little Italian women came up to me afterwards and said, "From that part of the country, the words you were using are slang for penis."
Oh! So you weren't asking for a fish at all. You were asking
I
for
was
3
asking
dicks.
really eloquently. Louder and louder every time.
Give me penis.
Give me cock.
I had a similar terrible moment like that in France when somebody told me way into our time there, maybe 6 months into our time there, that this phrase, which was one of my just go-to catchphrases, "Je suis excitée, je suis excitée." I used to say it all the time. I thought it just meant, this is great, I'm really happy. It was just like general enthusiasm. And I would say it at the supermarket, at the school gate. I didn't have a lot of phrases. And at a party, somebody pulled me aside and said, "You're saying I'm so horny." I'm aroused.
You two are not allowed.
Yeah.
You're not allowed out together.
And I said it
penis and
all
you
the
can say, "I'm
time.
so horny."
Louder and louder and louder.
We could have such a great conversation.
I'm definitely not asking for cock in Cessnock. It's not going to work for me very well.
I've completely lost control of this panel. Tell me something about it. I'll just open it up to you. Tell me something about the natives that surprised you, the people that you met, or tell me something that stuck in your mind.
I'll start with the Australians and then throw it to you guys.
Natives of Cessnock. Is there anyone from Cessnock here?
Yeah, probably.
We should just...
They're over the hill. We don't
It's
speak
all
to
right,
them
I've
over
bought security. So I was actually quite scared to move there, to be honest. And so we went shopping for that tractor. And I've got this thing where when I'm shopping in that kind of blokey environment, I put on a blokey kind of voice. And so I walked up to the guy in the sales yard and I said, "Oh yeah, we're here to get a tractor." And Jeff turned to me, he's like, "Why are you talking like that?" I said, "Oh, stay in the Flaming Crows, Jeff. Just listen here and watch what happens." I said, in the country, there are 3 kinds of pricing. You've got retail price, and that's for people who just walk in and don't haggle. You've got low tail, so that's for locals. And then for people like me and Jeff, you've got gay tail. And that's the, inflated price because you're homosexual. But what I learnt is that actually I could be as blokey as I wanted to in that stupid voice. But once the locals learnt or saw that we were prepared to get our hands dirty and do some hard yakka, as my Australian blokiness coming out, they actually really took us under their wing. And in the book, with the pig on the front, you'll find that out there. But in the book I wrote, and you two can maybe relate or correct me, I think it's similar to moving to France. And or Italy, and even if you're speaking really bad Italian or French, the locals go, "Hey, they're trying, let's help them along a little bit." And I felt the same in the country. As soon as they saw I was willing to play that hard game, they were like, "Yep, we'll help you out."
I'm interested in that too from you, Rachel, because the French, of course, have a reputation for being quite snobbish towards people who are only trying to speak French and don't do it. What did you actually find?
So our experience could not have been more opposite to that idea or stereotype of... it's very Parisian, really, that notion that people would sort of just generally look down on foreigners, especially ones with, clumsy French, the horny ones. But we landed in this small town, and the town just found it so bizarre and absurd that these kind of like scruffy, surf rat-looking Australians would be in this place. Australia, they barely knew where it was. I had people ask me what part of Europe Australia was in. Like, people really, they were such a distance from Paris. It was this world unto itself in France, and Australia was just outside, so exotic. And so the idea that we were there, and also just in the kind of scruffy bit of the town, we were sending our kids to just the local school, and just all our friends were on the street, and the bourgeoisie were kind of up on the hill, and there was a private school, but there was this completely never the twain aspect to those 2 worlds, and we were of the world of the town, and everybody was poor, and everybody kind of shopped at the Croix Rouge, which was the op shop, and we sort of cooked each other cakes, and it was just very warm and welcoming, and people just looked after us beautifully. It was amazing.
And what did you find, Pip? What about the natives?
I think this might be all of our experience. We were living with the communities that we were in. We weren't tourists in the communities that we were in. And so for us, we were travelling from around Italy, but working on farms for a number of weeks or months at a time. And part of the deal when you're a woofer is that you work, you're meant to work 6 hours a day, and you get food and board and inclusion in the family and the community in return. Actually, at some farms we were working 13 hours a day, but actually alongside the family who were also working that many hours a day. And they would tell us, we don't have to keep working, but we did feel like we were part of that family, part of that community, and really their lives were difficult. And it was a pleasure in a way to continue working with them, alongside them, partly because we had nothing else to do. And everywhere we were was quite remote as well, and we didn't have a car, and we were backpacking, and it was quite, our finances were quite limited. But I didn't have housework. The children weren't going to school. I was supposed to be homeschooling them, so if there is anybody from the education department, that didn't really work. But yeah, and so we were, in a similar way, we were just part of the community. When the community had a fiesta of some kind, we would go along to that, and we'd be the only people there that wasn't a local. And yeah, we found it very, people were very generous, people were very welcoming. There were 4 farms that I write about in here, and one of them was more difficult than the others. And part of that was because we weren't included as much in the family. But that was also very educational, because for me we went there in order to try to understand, how do we live the good life? How do we live like the people on the farms that we were staying at live? And I was coming to the slow realisation that it was not something I wanted to do. It was really hard work. I realised I can't actually bend down and stand up very easily. I tend to fall over. You have to do a lot of that when you're farming. I didn't realise how much you have to bend down.
I'm going to have to pick these grapes. Who knew?
I know. And so physiologically, I'm just not suited to the land. And it took me, 6 months and a whole 2 years of writing this book to figure that out.
Well, I'm going to ask you all a question about what was something that you absolutely must not do in the communities that you were in, that you would quite regularly do as Australians. So bear that in mind, something that you did that you realised, oh my goodness, you cannot do that here. But I'm also interested in this idea that you're all three are authors of the stories of your adventure. I'm wondering also, were you also the main driver in your family to do this? And is there any guilt associated with that? Do you have to bring people over the line? Did you have to try to coerce and convince them? Were they all on board? And when things aren't necessarily going well, the kids are lonely or can't make a friend or whatever, or in your case, you've got someone 100 kilometres away trying to pick a grape. Do you feel any guilt about it, or did it work out okay? And I don't mind who goes first.
I'm happy to go first. I think I was the driver of this to some extent. So when my partner Shannon and I got together, I had grand ideas of being a volunteer overseas, which would be like a 2-year stint working somewhere. It's the sort of thing that I had always longed to do. My partner is a homebody. He has no real desire to go to far-flung places. And in some ways this was a compromise, because he wanted to have a permaculture farm. That's why we moved to South Australia, because he wanted to grow food. That's what he wanted to do. And I thought, oh, well, we could do this instead, because it combines his passion and mine. And so I guess I led it. Did I have to convince the kids? Absolutely. When I said, I'm pulling you out of school for 6 months, that was a good step in the right direction as far as they were concerned. But they both needed a bit of encouragement. My youngest son, at the time he was 9, and his favourite food was pesto pasta. And I said, we're going to where pesto pasta comes from. So that worked. That's all I had to do for him. And my other son, it was gelato. But in particular, I'd read in a guidebook that in Italy they actually have a Pokemon gelato. I know. And he was so into Pokemon at the time, and he was not very happy about leaving and travelling. He's also a homebody. But the introduction of this treasure hunt for Pokemon gelato became really real, and we searched for it all around Italy. We never actually found it, though.
Did you make it up, Pip?
No, it really was. It was in our guidebook. But what we did find everywhere was Pikachu gelato, and I can't remember what it means. It might mean pistachio, or it might mean something like that. But yeah, so he came just to search for Pokemon gelato. But that did actually mean there was not a day that went past where we weren't searching for Pokemon gelato. We went into every gelato in Italy, in every gelateria. I can't remember how to say it.
What are you asking us for?
Yeah. So they did need some convincing, but yeah.
And what about you, Rachel? Were you the driver?
No, we were both the drivers, but definitely, especially school was really, really hard for the kids at this school. We kind of really threw the kids into non-English speaking school, like full immersion, they call it, immersion learning, and the whole kind of theory behind it is that, within a couple of months that the kind of babble around the kids coalesces into something recognisable, and then it's just a matter of adding vocabulary and words, and then they get to fart jokes, which is the culture of Wollongong, the town, yeah. And that is fluency, yeah. And so, I just had this very strong notion that it would just be this linear progression, that it was going to be really hard at the beginning and then it would be fine and they would make friends and it would just be wonderful and everything would be sunshine and roses and unicorns from there. And it just never worked out like that. There was always one child in tears at the gates going in, if not three. And school was very different. It is very tough and teachers scream like dragons, and the gates are locked and parents are not allowed behind them. There's a lot of terrorism protocol. It's a bit Lord of the Flies in the playground. And so it was, there were definitely times of thinking, what have we done to these, kind of fragile developing senses of self? And we had always really felt strongly that the challenge of that was part of the reasoning for going, that the kids live in this very privileged little beachside bubble, a very safe and loving life and a small little school, and it's really wonderful, but to have that challenged a bit and tested a bit and to see what life was like when things weren't quite so easy, I really believe that would hold, these sparks of compassion and an understanding of what it meant to be an outsider and things like that. And those theories were difficult to hold on to when the child was crying and, and 5 years on, I stand by it. I think it was absolutely worth it, and they would say so too.
You can see that resilience in them?
It's hard to really attach it to that stuff. There's so many different drivers of what makes a child a person, but I think that year was unlike any other year that they've had, and I think there were real lessons in character from it, yeah.
And what do you say? Were you the driver?
I thought I was. I had that vision of me in the kitchen making quince paste like my idol Maggie Beer, and I didn't really care what Jeff was going to be doing. I was just like, well, I'm going to be now the Hunter's version of Maggie Beer. And when we bought the vineyard and there were Semillon grapes, I was like, great, now I can make verjuice just like Maggie Beer. And so then I said to Jeff, he couldn't drive at the time, he didn't have a license. I said, well, if we're going to move, you're going to have to learn how to drive.
Hang on.
Annandale.
You bought a farm and he didn't have a license.
He didn't know how to drive. I mean, he was only 16 at the time. I'm only kidding. He's 40-odd, it's fine. No, he didn't know how to drive. And then he was going to try and work remotely, and I said, maybe you should quit work. And then I said, well, let's just bulldoze all the crops because we're not really farmers. And we bought this bottle of broken wood wine that was made out of our grapes. On the very first night we moved into the property, we're sitting, sipping this wine, and it was honestly phenomenal wine. And I looked at him and he looked at me and I went, oh, no. And I said, we're going to be farmers now, aren't we? And he said, well, how hard could that be? So then when we bought the tractor, which didn't have a cab in it, he had to spray lethal chemicals at 4 a.m. every morning in what really was an Oompa Loompa suit, a hazmat suit. And I just figured that I should put him in danger because someone had to write the story if he died.
And drive the car.
And drive the car, correct. And so he was also petrified of spiders when we moved. Like, you have no idea how scared of spiders he is. He's from Birmingham, by the way. Birmingham, you can all do the accent. And so when we moved to the country, he's so scared of spiders. So while he's driving this tractor with no cab in 4 a.m. darkness, there's about 26,000 spider webs across every single row of grapes. And he would capture them at the front of the tractor. And so when he got back at 10 a.m., he'd get off the tractor in his Oompa Loompa suit and go, are there any spiders on me? No, nothing at all. It's fine. So I thought I was driving it, and then I had unleashed this beast of a person, and I could not believe the stuff he was doing. There was a dead kangaroo in the middle of the dam when we first moved, and I was like, oh, we've got to use that water to spray our crops. Maybe we should get the dead kangaroo out of there. And he's like, well, can't you do it? I said, no, I think you're going to have to help. So we rowed out in a blow-up boat, And I made him lean out over the edge and grab a hold of...
Blow-up boat?
Yeah, I made him go and buy a blow-up boat. And then I did the rowing, and I said to him, you're going to have to lean out and hold on to the kangaroo while I row us back to shore. So he was leaning out. This massive kangaroo. It was rotting. It stank to high heaven. And his face was right near it. And I was like, just hold the tail, Jeff. It's fine. Just hold the tail. And the flesh was coming off in his hands. And I'm rowing and I'm like, I can't believe I've made this guy do this. But any challenge that was thrown at him, like, honestly, it was amazing. So now I feel as though it was always in him and he wanted something to really challenge him and rise to the challenge. I don't think I forced him to do it, but you can all ask him afterwards.
Is he here?
Maybe. just pick the best looking man in the room and
hello. All is
Jeff.
forgiven. All is forgiven. Tell me also, all of you, about the writing of the experience. I mean, it's one thing to have the experience, and I guess a lot of people do have that experience of moving overseas or moving to a tree change or sea change, but the decision to write about it, which of course means exposing members of your family too, what prompted those decisions?
For me, we came back from Italy. I could have stayed there. I think I could have stayed there for years, actually. And for me, I think we came back prematurely. And we left... So we moved from Sydney to Adelaide for the tree change, failed at the tree change, and went to Italy, hoping we'd come back and having found our dream, having figured out how to live this life that we'd packed up from Sydney to do. And we came back and I felt like nothing had changed. I had been an academic and I had been completely burnt out, which was actually one of the drivers for leaving. A bit like you, my soul was withering. And I think often these shifts are the result of questioning where you happen to be at that moment in your life. And so when we came back to in August. It was beautiful in Europe, and we came back to an Adelaide Hills August, which was wet and cold, and the house sitters hadn't mowed anything the entire time we'd been gone, and there was soursop's, a knee high, and it was awful. And I was really depressed, and I'd been depressed when we left, and I was depressed now that we'd come back, thinking I couldn't possibly go back to academia, but lo and behold, I wasn't qualified to do anything else, And Shannon actually said, why don't you write about what we've just done? And he knew that I'd always wanted to be a writer. And so I did. I started writing about it. And I wrote about it in present tense and obviously in the first person. And I did that on purpose because, in a way, reliving the journey... And it is a physical journey. We went from place to place, but it was absolutely an emotional journey as well. And writing about it in first-person present tense was really important because as I suppose, reflected and relived that 6 months, as I thought about the lessons I'd learned from all of the women in particular at the farms where we stayed, but everyone that we met, as I reflected on who I was becoming over that 6 months. I was taking the journey again in real time, but emotionally reflecting. And by the end of it, I realised that, what my dream was actually really different to Shannon's dream. I had basically taken on his dream because it was trendy, or because it was very appealing, the whole tree change thing, the whole... organic, growing your own food and living off the land and being self-sufficient and treading gently on the earth. I believe in all of that stuff. But it just wasn't my dream. It was his. And I realised that I had a different dream that I'd just, I'd subdued for such a long time. And writing the book helped me to understand what that was. Yeah. It was to be an accountant.
Can I jump in and ask, had you not written this book, do you think you would have had the confidence and the drive to go to fiction?
No. And so it was writing this book that made me realise that what I wanted to do, what I'd always wanted to do, was write fiction. I'm one of those people that doesn't do anything until I'm completely overqualified. to do it. And so I couldn't have started writing fiction, and I felt like writing this book was a bit like an apprenticeship in creative writing, because I'd always been a writer as an academic, but I had to unlearn one type of writing in order to write creatively. And this was a wonderful stepping stone. And also for any writers out there, the other thing about writing a story like this, and I don't know if you two feel this way, is that even if a publisher is never interested in publishing it, the motivation to finish it is still there because it's about an experience that my family can always value. So it's not going to go into a bottom drawer. Well, it still might go into a bottom drawer, but but at least my sons and my partner and, you know, people who are close to us are still interested in the story, and so I was motivated to finish it.
What do you say?
Yeah, I relate so much to that, especially that idea that there is that other drive that you think, maybe I'll never sell this, maybe nobody else will ever read it, but it's a bit of a gift to the family for me to finish it. So when we were in France, I was working on another book, which is called Mothering Heights. It's a memoir of motherhood, early motherhood, and I'd been working on that for a couple of years when we went to France, and that was the book that I was trying to finish. And in fact, it's quite a sort of thread through this book is the process of kind of wrestling with myself to finish the first draft of that book, which I finished in Sommières when we were away. And I was always taking lots of notes about life in Sommières as well, and wrote a few magazine and newspaper pieces here and there, and I always had in my mind that story was probably a more commercial prospect than Mothering Heights anyway.
You mean this one was
book?
more...
Yeah. And Mothering Heights was my apprenticeship in even just knowing I can land this plane, I can make it to the end of this process, which any writers in the audience will know is mostly just a series of staring at your own inadequacy on a page and thinking what a moron you are, you know. That's really the work, is getting past that. And so, yeah, when I got home and then I got, over a bit of time, got an agent for Mothering Heights, and then she was sort of trying and failing to sell Mothering Heights while I was finishing up this book. And then, yeah, as soon as I had sort of finished, pardon my French, that sold pretty fast. And what I had always hoped was that, that if, pardon my French, did all right, then I would try and slip Mothering Heights in the back door, which I did. So that now is coming out next April. Yeah, but similarly to Pip, I always had this idea, look, you know, Mothering Heights is a little gift to the kids about their very early life, and then... pardon my French, this is like a gift to Keith about this kind of a romantic adventure we took, and then if I never sell either one of them, then, you know, I'll face the truth and, you know, become a florist and just give up on the whole thing because it's clear that nobody else wants these books, you know?
I'm so happy you didn't.
And now I'm trying to write fiction.
Yeah, I'm imagining us, if we hadn't published these books in our 80s at the library photocopying copies for our grandchildren.
For the great-great-grandchildren.
Which is fine,
exactly.
which is lovely, actually.
My journey's
Did you
tiny
always
bit
know
different.
you were going to do it?
No, definitely not. I had written fiction and books about using the internet, so I had been in the publishing industry for quite a while, but I thought fiction was where my future lay. And then I went out one day and I bought a pig. And her name was Helga. Is still Helga.
And before we got here, we had to look at pig pictures,
Yeah,
guys.
it's like most
people have a dog.
or their children. Show us a photo of your kids. It's like, no, here's my pig. So I went and bought this pig. And
You have kids.
I do have kids, but no one wants to see those photos.
But it's still the pig
It's
on the
the
screen.
pig every time. Okay, lucky the kids aren't in the audience. So I started posting videos of this tiny pig, like she could fit in one hand. And she lived in the house with us, and she was toilet trained, and she could sit like a dog. And all of a sudden, people started saying to me, what did you make for Helga's breakfast today? And how's Helga? And this is all on Instagram. Now, because I'd been published before, one of the people who followed me was a publishing director, so Lou Johnson, who anyone in the industry has probably heard of. And she wrote to me and said, you should write a book about this pig. And I looked at Jeff, and Jeff was like, who's going to want to read a book about a pig and two guys who leave Annandale and move to the country? But what Lou said to me was, I want it to be like the pig's your oracle. So I started writing this book about this pig showing me how to live my life. It was appalling. It was so bad. And I just wrote to Lou and I was like, sorry, Lou, but that's a really shit idea and it's not floating. She said, well, let me come up to the property. So she came up with her husband and Jeff and I just started riffing, like telling our story of how we got there. She said, that's the book I want you to write. And Jeff again, he's like, no one's going to want it. And here we are. And it just changed my whole career. So I don't really even write fiction anymore. I just keep doing memoir. And then the people in my life, so it's usually Jeff, he's like, oh, here we go again. This latest one, I've got mum and dad. And so whenever they said anything that I found kind of funny, I'd pull out my phone and write notes, and mum and dad would be like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah,
what are you writing about? It's like, maybe you too.
Yeah. Now, we are going to take questions from the floor. I think have we got about 10 minutes to go? Is that you about right? So we'll take questions from the floor. There is a microphone up the front. As you ready your questions, and I know you'll have them, was there anything you did, particularly as Australians, that you absolutely should not have done as a city boy in the country or in a foreign country?
Mine can be really brief. So I found in the city, when you were paying people to do stuff for you, you should act like the boss. When you move to the country, it doesn't matter who's paying the bill. You shouldn't treat people you're paying for like the help. And what we found is when we were pulling grapes off with all the Cessnock locals, and when we were driving the tractor next to them, and when our builder came to build with us and I took him lunch and called him mate, that's when your entire experience is transformed. And what locals hate in the Hunter is, their words, not mine, Sydney wankers buying up property and then getting all the locals in to do all the hard work. And so while you might do that in the city, you might not really talk to your cleaner or your gardener or whatever. In the country, you getting in amongst it was absolutely the best thing to do. So it took a little bit of readjustment for us because we were like, well, we're paying the bill. Why should we be helping?
Right, okay. What do you say?
Gosh, okay. I would say that where in Australia we are very just egalitarian, chat to anybody and everybody. In France, you don't ask the supermarket teller, ça va, how are you? You say bonjour.
Really? Okay.
It's very important to always say bonjour in every shop and every person that you pass. It's very polite. Society runs on a lot of wonderful politeness, but at the till, you say bonjour, but you don't say bonjour, ça va, like you would say to a friend or anybody else in Australia. How you going? How's your day? How long till your shift finishes? How's it going? You know, that sort of chatting. Yeah, they really hate it.
I think I've been behind you at the supermarket.
Yeah, you'd hate me behind, yeah. But so, yeah, you would actually get a real withering glare. It's the glare I used to call the withering Parisian, which was just a particular look of disdain. And so I was like, oh, I learnt that sort of earlier not to say that. And then by the end of our few months, I just used to do it again because I'd just be like, I'm Australian, this is how we roll.
This is how we roll.
Yeah, I'm just gonna
Everyone's
ask you.
like, can these horny women get their penises and just get out of here?
Well, I was about to say, I think it's the opposite in Italy. You know, they'll talk to you about anything. And I think, yeah, my can I have two cock, request is probably an example of that. In terms of, I don't know that there were any faux pas. I think the Italians we met anyway were incredibly kind of curious and generous and just eager for a laugh. So we fitted in quite well there. But there were the things that I learned because I was travelling with children. And again, it's a particular thing when you're travelling and working with children. So we went to Italy in a way to get away from some of the constraints of working and raising children in Australia. And we find ourselves on farms where we might be away from the children for 6 hours and they're free to do whatever they like. We purposely went to farms where there were children, but they didn't always get on. And what we found is we were having some of the same conversations in the morning and rushing the children so that we could get to the vines. Actually, on one of the properties that we stayed on was a vineyard. And suddenly realising that the children were coming second to the woofing work that we were kind of contracted to do. And so there were a lot of wake-up calls around being assertive and not too polite and parenting putting the children first. The first farm that we stayed on, and this is in the book, my eldest son couldn't eat the food, mostly because all he ate was white bread.
And pesto.
Well, no, this is the oldest, so he didn't even eat pesto. It just gelato and white bread was pretty much all he ate. And we were on this farm where all the food was really wholesome and whole grain, and he hadn't eaten for 2 days. And I was too polite to say, we need to go to the shops and buy some food that my son can eat. And I went into the room we were all sharing, and he was lying down, and he had vomited because we'd given him his Easter eggs early because he hadn't eaten. And he'd vomited them all up, and I just thought I was making all these compromises for everybody else to be polite because we were living in other people's homes and on other people's farms and not asking for what my family needed. And the wake-up call was that you need to be assertive and not so polite. And we became more and more assertive throughout that
Questions, please.
trip.
Do we have a question from the audience? Come on, don't be shy. There's lots of you here.
No one wants to come down to the front.
No one wants to come down. We've got a roving mic if you'd like. Well, if you don't have a question, I'll ask you another one. All three of you are home, and please do, if you have a question, please come up. All three of you are home from your farm and from your foreign adventures. Was there a point at which you thought, I could actually do this forever?
So we still live in the country. We don't have a vineyard anymore. But I guess I'd answer that by saying everyone said to us, you'll be coming back to Sydney. You'll come back at some point. Don't sell all your property. Just keep your toe in the water. And I cannot stand Sydney anymore. I was born and bred there, lived there for 40 years, and there's no chance in hell that I will ever live back in the city. So, no, this is it for me.
But you sold the...
So we sold the vineyard, took the pig, the 8 goats, the 2 sheep, the 12 peacocks, the cat, all the other animals, moved to another property and then sold that and then moved to another property. So we're still in the country, but we're not farming grapes and olives anymore.
And was that a decision to give up the working nature of it, or...?
Yes and no. Like, when you've run a vineyard for 8 years, pretty much the thought of doing it again is the last thing on the planet. But we kind of look at each other every once in a while and go, maybe just 4 rows of grapes, maybe just 5 olive trees. So I wouldn't say never, but at this point in time, that's behind us. But living in the country and being around animals is still where we want to be.
How do you move a pig?
Yeah, that's a whole other story. You basically hire the right gear and you bribe her as much as possible, and it's very challenging, particularly when she breaks out of the moving vehicle and runs across the property where you've got guests staying, and she had been known to bite people. So, yeah, and she's 180 kilos and can actually run very fast. So,
How long will she live?
About 18 to 20 years or so. Yeah. So my best friend's around for a while longer, but over to you guys.
What did you think? Did you think at the end of your year in Italy I could stay?
Well, I was in France, Caroline, but that's fine.
I'm sorry. Allow me to get that thing out of my eye.
We would have loved to stay. And I think another year would have been perfect for everybody's language and all of that kind of stuff. But my mum wasn't well, and there were just a few reasons why we had to come back. And then not long after we came home, in the end, it was COVID, and everything kind of went in a different direction. So we had planned to go and spend another year in Montreal, and sort of like, a different version of French, and that never played out. And now the kids are adolescents, and unfortunately they have agency.
Not so easy to push around anymore.
Yeah, you can't just say, get in the car, get in the car, we're going. So no, now Keith and I, when we're sort of talking about future adventures, it's sailing and retirement,
Once they're off and on their own.
Yeah.
Once you put them in the cupboard.
Yep.
I could have definitely kept doing what we were doing. Partly living out of a backpack is incredibly liberating. I really enjoyed not having much stuff. And of course you come home and we've got heaps of stuff, and I don't know why I need it here, but I didn't need it over there. But we've sort of we've stuck halfway. So our first move was from Sydney to the Adelaide Hills to 5 acres, similar to yours. And I wouldn't move back to Sydney for anything.
I would never move back to Sydney
No,
either. I
no.
think probably the audience would agree.
Yeah. Even though
Anyone
I
here
don't...
dying to live in Sydney?
Yeah. Yeah. But even though I don't do the growing, so Shannon still does the growing. We have an orchard, we have some animals, we have all of that, and he does most of that, and I help in the kitchen sometimes. So we seem to have struck a balance, and yeah, but I could have done the backpacking for a lot longer.
Right. Any questions? Yes, here we go. Roving mic is on the way.
How do you afford to take 6 months off? I mean, most people have bills to pay and so on. They've got maybe a mortgage. So how do you save up enough money to be able to take the time off?
I think that's a great question. I know a lot of people who dream about this, particularly with kids, but they worry about, and also the idea of slippage, that if we step out of Sydney and our incomes and our jobs and so on, that we will never get back in.
So woofing is almost self-sufficient because you are paid in food and board. So you have very few costs in terms of that 6 months. You have to pay for your fares here and there. And we had people come and live in our house so they can pay the rent. Otherwise, it was our savings. So we were choosing, but we had a kitchen that pretty much didn't work. And it was a decision that we made where we could sort of renovate the kitchen, or we could travel for 6 months. It was a pretty easy and quick decision. We decided to travel for 6 months.
What about you? How was the financing of it?
Well, we weren't rich, but we were portable. So Keith works from home, has a little software company that he runs with a couple of friends, and I was just writing from home and raising the kids. So we just moved the circus from one location to another. Yeah.
And for us, we just took every dollar we had, put it in a bonfire and set a light to it. And didn't take a holiday for 10 years and didn't sleep for about 8.5. That's how you run a vineyard.
Did you come out on top in the end?
Yeah, so we were very fortunate. We had more or less achieved everything we wanted to. We still had a massive mortgage. COVID hit, and we're like, how the hell are we going to survive this? We really, really struggled. And then at the end of the first wave of COVID, all those really lovely, really wealthy Sydney people said, gee, I'd love 100 acres in the Hunter Valley. And we weren't going to sell because we still had a few things to do. And I'm really good friends with a local real estate agent. And he called me up and said, you'd be crazy not to do this. So we did.
Right. Do we have another question from the audience? Exhausted? Joe, you got a question? Come on. Well, in that case, I think we're going to wrap it up. Well, I can't thank you all enough for being so generous with me, having had to share this panel at very, very short notice, which I was honoured to do on Cheryl's behalf. But also, my heartfelt thanks to the three writers. I never, ever come so terribly, terribly unprepared. I make it a point of pride to me that I am prepared, but it was a short notice thing. You have been amazingly warm and welcoming, and also wonderful talks. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you. If
Carol.
you could thank our
Thank
three
you.